Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Britta. I work at the Coolidge Corner Library, and I want to especially thank those of you who planned to attend this program when it was originally scheduled for being flexible with this rescheduled date. A couple of Zoom reminders before we begin. Feel free to interact using the chat, but please do stay muted and leave your video off, at least until we reach a Q&A portion of the program. We are recording today, so if you do not want to appear in the recording, you should leave your video off the whole time. Let me know if you ask a question to avoid using your name. You will all receive a follow-up email probably sometime next week with a link to the recording, as well as a handout listing some of the resources that will be covered today. So keep an eye out for that. You probably all know by now that the Brookline libraries are open to the public again, and I hope you'll come visit us soon if you haven't had a chance already. However, for the time being, all of our library programs are continuing in virtual format. That includes summer reading. I encourage you to check out what we have going on for summer reading. It kicks off on Monday. There are programs for all ages, and you can pre-register now. I'll put the URL in the chat, but it's brklib.com/summer21. So again, welcome. I'd like to introduce John Root, our presenter for today's program on attracting birds, butterflies, bees, and other beneficials. John's background is in biology, botany, and education. He has been presenting gardening and nature programs throughout New England for more than 15 years. He also leads edible wild plant walks. John is a certified organic landscaping professional, community organizer, and musician. Among his current activities is one that's very relevant to today's topic. He promotes the establishment of pollinator habitat on public and private land through Western Mass pollinator networks. We're so grateful that he's sharing his expertise with us today. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. So I'm going to stop my video, and you'll see me again at the end of the program and share my screen. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So I'd like to thank the Brookline Public Library for hosting this event, and the Brookline Cultural Council for funding the presentation. And we acknowledge that we live on land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. Please take a moment to find your location on the map and honor those whose land we now occupy. So what are beneficials in the title of this program? They are the organisms that help farmers and gardeners to grow the food and other crops that we need. And beneficials include the 3 Ps: pollinators, predators, and parasites. So pollinators are important to assure that there is genetic diversity, that each new generation has a lot of variety and to be able to be resilient in the face of environmental change. And there are many pollinators out there. Although we do not have bats pollinating flowers here in New England, we do have bees and butterflies, also hummingbirds, the ruby throat. In addition, we have moths, wasps, flies, and beetles visiting flowers and carrying the pollen from one flower to the next. 80% of all plants need pollinators to set seed. The remainder, 20% or so, are wind pollinated. 1/3 of our food is pollinated, and pollinators make a difference. This slide shows the strawberry in the center only received its own pollen. The one on the right managed to get some pollen that was windborne from other strawberry flowers, but the strawberry on the left was actually visited by pollinators delivering that pollen to the flower from other plants. What a difference that makes. So that's the case for many crops. And so birds are beneficial organisms because they are predators. They function as for pest control, and also help plants to disperse their seeds. There are only two birds that I'm familiar with here in New England that are pollinators. Those would be the ruby-throated hummingbird and the Baltimore oriole. Bird populations have declined alarmingly in the last half century and will continue to do so unless we do a lot of things very differently. And it's not just the sheer number of birds out there, but also the diversity. This is the case for other vertebrates and invertebrates as well. Biodiversity is very important for healthy ecosystems to be functioning properly. So let's make sure that we are helping or make sure that we're not harming birds in addition to looking for ways to help them. One of the problems that birds encounter is that they see these large picture windows and perceive them to be part of the outdoors because they're reflecting so perfectly. So it causes a lot of casualties every year. And we can make our birds more visible, make our windows more visible to birds in a variety of ways, which you can read about at the American Bird Conservancy website. I'd be happy to make these links available to you, by the way, at the end of this presentation, if you just send me an email message, or actually I can also send the resources that I used to make this presentation to the Brookline Public Library at the end of the program as well. So cats are another hazard to bird and cause of a declining bird populations. A staggering 3.7 billion birds are killed by cats every year, and that's both house cats and feral cats. Perhaps if you have a house cat, being concerned about your own cat's welfare might motivate you to keep it indoors, because there are predators out there, and cats can be harmed by other cats and dogs as well. Habitat loss is a huge cause of declining bird population and other wildlife due to agriculture, residential and commercial development. And climate change is also becoming more and more important as having an impact on bird populations due to habitat loss for in a variety of ways. Climate change is causing new pests and diseases to be proliferating, and there are disruptions in timing of migration, reproduction, breeding, nesting, and hatching, which are also occurring. And bird behavior may no longer be in sync with their food sources and other habitat needs due to climate change. Well, one thing we can do about climate change is simply reduce our consumption and our waste, because as you can see on this pie chart, about 40% of our carbon footprint is the goods, the non-food and food items that we purchase. So every time you get out your credit card, or however you spend your money, consider whether the purchase you're about to make is really that important to your welfare or your quality of life, and whether you could do without it, or trade for it, or get something that's used instead of buying it new. There are a lot of ways that we can, if we're mindful about our expenses, that we can be more careful about our carbon footprint in this way. Well, bird watching is a great way to connect with nature and to have a less consumerist lifestyle as well, because it's something that really doesn't require much in the way of expenditures, or it's really a fascinating way to learn about nature and to connect with others as well. massbird.org is a website that'll connect you with the closest Massachusetts Bird Club, and bird clubs have also been sharing their programs online as well via Zoom. So birds are enchanting just to watch them fly and hear them sing, see how devoted they are to each other and to their young. And birds, and other animals as well, need four things. They need food, water, shelter, and places to rear their young. So one thing we can do to make sure we're not harming is to feed, is to resist the urge to feed baked goods that are really junk food to birds because they're often heavily processed and contain preservatives, salt, sugar, and refined flour, and they don't have enough of the things that birds need in their diet, including protein and fat. So these are empty calories for birds. This is the consequence of what happens to a bird that eats too much of this processed food, baked goods. This bird will never fly again. So it is okay to feed birds eggshells for calcium and for roughage in their digestive system. And it's fun to offer them different kinds of fruit to see which birds will eat which fruits. Bananas, apples, and raisins are all possibilities. So are hard cheese, peas, corn, oats, squash or pumpkin seeds, and any kind of nuts, including peanuts and peanut butter. And you can create your own do-it-yourself bird feeder. There are many ideas that you can get from the internet or come up with your own. If you have a platform feeder such as this, you will need to monitor it regularly and clean it frequently because birds will foul that platform. And squirrels are another challenge. Most of us don't want squirrels to be pilfering all the seed that we're offering to the birds. You want to place your feeder about 6 feet tall, so a metal pole that's 8 feet long, buried 2 feet down, works well. And the 330 rule is you don't want the bird feeder to be between 3 and 30 feet from a window. The reason for this is that birds, when they're startled and they're chased by a bird of prey, they might slam right into a window in their effort to escape. The feeder should also be at least 12 feet away from vegetation, so predators don't have a chance to lurk in the vegetation and pounce on the birds. Perhaps this is the best design for a bird feeder. What's not to like about being so close to the birds and being able to see them at close range like this? Also, it's hard for squirrels and predators to access this feeder, and you will be monitoring it frequently, and you'll be able to see when it needs cleaning. It's fine to feed birds in the summer. There's a Baltimore oriole enjoying an orange. The bluebird will eat mealworms, either dead or alive. You can actually buy dead mealworms at the grocery store. And many birds, including this rose-breasted grosbeak, will enjoy sunflower seed any month of the year. If you do feed birds during the summer, you need to keep the seed dry. It tends to become moist at the bottom of the feeder. So fill the feeders only halfway and refill frequently to prevent mold. Mold will also happen on the ground right below a feeder because the seed and the shells, seed shells, will fall there and become moldy. So if you can either move your feeders around to prevent mold buildup, or simply keep it clean right underneath those feeders. And you need to clean the feeders themselves regularly, wash them every 2 weeks, rinse and dry before refilling. You can make your own suet. You can buy suet and feed it to birds as is, in the meat department of a grocery store. Or you can mix shortening and peanut butter and heat them together. Add cornmeal and flour is optional. There's other ingredients that you can add as well. And then freeze them in molds such as, freeze that suet mixture in molds such as empty tin cans or an ice cube tray for a couple of hours. And then that suet will be ready to put into a suet feeder. Be aware that suet can become rancid at temperatures above 50 degrees, so you don't want to offer suet in the summer. Bird baths can be purchased fairly inexpensively, or even made for free if you have the right materials on hand. Consider that an upside down a garbage can lid could serve as a bird feeder, for example. The heated bird baths in the winter are much appreciated by birds to have some liquid water to bathe or drink from. And different birds need different kinds of bird boxes, and you'll see it at the allbirds.com website, specifications for bird houses for each of these 8 birds and more birds besides. And you'll see, for example, the box floor, the dimensions of the box floor, the height of the box, the entrance height, the placement, the entrance diameter and the placement above the ground are all different for different birds. So here is an example of a bird box at the allbirds.com website, which shows that it's good to have some holes at the top of on the sides for ventilation, and the hinges here show that you enable you to open one side for cleaning and inspection. The holes at the base also are advisable for drainage. And again, a metal pole works well to mount a bird box. You would want to put it in the shade, give birds a clear flight path, and face that hole away from the prevailing wind. Starlings and house sparrows are exotic, non-native alien birds. They came from Europe, and they do a lot of damage to our native birds. They displace them, take over the nesting boxes, and they also actually kill other birds, the eggs and the chicks. So these birds are not protected by the state, and you are free to trap them or harass them if you choose to. So please don't offer colorful bird houses. They attract the attention of predators. Also, perches are not necessary for birds, but they also help predators gain access to bird houses. Birds should be made exclusively of wood and should not be dangling from a string, but should be securely fastened. Squirrels are perfectly capable of enlarging a hole and helping themselves to bird boxes, so that you can prevent them from doing that by mounting a metal plate with a circle in the center. If a birdhouse is secured to a tree, it's very easy for a predator to access it unless you take precautions such as this a metal surrounding metal cage, and really it's probably best to have it on a pole. At the end of the summer, you'll want to clean that birdhouse, scrub it well with a 9-to-1 solution of water and bleach, and return the bird box to where you had it before, because birds might use it in the winter as a roosting box, and you can actually make or buy a box for that purpose. Birds really appreciate the chance to keep each other warm and be protected from the elements during winter. And in the spring, it can be fun to offer a variety of nesting materials to birds using a suet feeder or a mesh bag, and see which ones they like to use. When people groom their cats or dogs, they often put that hair out on a branch for the birds to help themselves when they're making their nests. Caterpillars are the best baby food for chicks. They're soft, easily digestible, and have all the nutrients that chicks need, and they need a lot of them. A black-capped chickadee mother will have to find 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to fledge her brood of chicks. That's a lot of caterpillars. And Doug Tallamy, a very well-known environmentalist, he's a scientist who studied caterpillars a lot, and he's a real campaigner for gardening or landscaping with native plants. The reason for this is that non-native plants have chemicals in their leaves that are not digestible for our caterpillars. The caterpillars haven't had enough time to figure out or to change their own digestive systems to be able to break down those chemicals. So native plants have been around for long enough so that even though they have defenses as well, caterpillars have figured out how, in an evolutionary sense, how to digest them. So here is a list of the best trees, vines, and shrubs to plant for birds, and it's offered at the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology website, allaboutbirds.org. Oaks are a fantastic tree because there's so many caterpillars, different kinds of caterpillars, and the sheer quantity that visit oak trees, and that's true for many other trees as well. Mulberry has fruit that's absolutely delicious for birds. You'll really be delighted if you have a mulberry tree, to see how many birds will flock to the tree and how many different kinds of birds. I enjoy eating mulberries myself. Sassafras fruits are attractive to birds as well. And so are elderberry fruits. This is another fruit that I enjoy making elderberry pancakes, elderberry muffins, elderberries in my hot cereal. And it's a very, very healthy fruit for both birds and people. Sometimes when we're landscaping, we think that we need to have exotic plants, non-native plants that are in order to have a beautiful, showy landscapes. And that's certainly not, it's simply not true. There's so many of our native plants that are just gorgeous, and they fit right in, of course, because they are native. So all of the viburnums are quite attractive. This wild raisin, the arrowwood, the smaller shrub that you will find in the forest floor, called maple leaf viburnum, and then there's black haw viburnum, which is a larger, more like a small tree. And then there are the dogwoods, and again, all of the dogwood fruits are appealing to birds, and they can also be quite ornamental and attractive. Red osier dogwood, as the name implies, has red twigs, so it's beautiful in all seasons. And if you like the white dogwood tree, if you like the idea of a lot of them on your property, you can get 10 free white dogwood trees at Arbor Day. Arborday.org offers 10 of the white dogwood or American redbud or river birch or any of these half dozen conifers. And if you choose, you can get one each of these shade trees by making a donation of any amount that you choose to Arbor Day. Spicebush shrubs have fruit that is 50% fat, which is a great energy source for birds. Blueberries are irresistible to just about any bird. So are berries of Juneberry, of the Juneberry tree, which again, I love these fruits. They're so it's a native fruit that's a fairly small tree that's not that well known, certainly not as well known as blueberries, but I consider the fruits to be just as delicious as blueberries, and they're wonderfully ornamental in all seasons, the Juneberry tree. Then there's the hawthorn, the crabapple, black cherry and choke cherry, appealing to birds, and the black chokeberry, which is a shrub, again, edible for people as well. It's and quite medicinal. So, and health promoting, you could call it a superfruit. So if you want to learn about different plants and their basic qualities, or the facts that you might want to know about whether they're appropriate for your landscape and what size they will become at maturity and that sort of thing, simply enter the common name, or the Latin name, and Missouri in your search engine, and you'll come to the Missouri Botanical Gardens page describing that plant. They have this kind of information about so many different kinds of plants that will be helpful when you're planning your design on your property. For example, the height and spread of the plant, when it blooms, and the flower, color of the flower, its needs for sun and water, and you'll see also notice that this plant tolerates wet soil. Garden locations indicates where you can purchase the plant. So other fruits that will be much appreciated by birds include blackberries, black raspberries, staghorn sumac. Those fruits are available into the beginning of winter, and throughout the winter. The gorgeous fruits of Winterberry Haily are attractive in the landscape and are nourishing for birds as well. Here's another fruit that birds can eat anytime during the winter when rations are scarce, the northern bayberry. And conifers often have seeds that are edible for birds and provide nesting sites and shelter. And surprisingly, they also are host plants for caterpillars. About 200 different species of caterpillar will eat the needles of the white pine. And the eastern red cedar has fruits that birds eat as well. Now, if you're thinking about which plant can go where on your property, you need to be aware of things like how much sunlight is visiting that area, what the moisture situation is, whether it's wet or dry. Soil texture can vary. It can be sandy or more towards the clay end. And there are different plants that can handle either sun or shade, dry or wet, sandy or clay, but no plant can succeed in compacted soil. So you might want to be aware of, you will want to be aware of whether your soil is compacted and to take action if necessary to alleviate that situation. So a simple test for compacted soil is to straighten a metal wire hanger, coat hanger rather, plunge it into the ground about 1 foot deep, and then attempt to move it around. And if it bends readily, then you can be assured that that soil is quite compacted. But if it moves freely, then that's not an issue. You can also send your soil to a soil testing laboratory. For example, the University of Massachusetts in Amherst has a soil testing lab that will tell you about the nutrients, both macro and micronutrients in the soil, the pH of the soil. You can do a test also for organic content, and that can be helpful to know where you stand with. But the bottom line is that if there are a lot of plants growing on your landscape already without any help, it's not likely that you're going to need to be concerned with soil additions in terms of adding nutrients or changing the pH. So when you're about to put that tree or shrub in the hole, make sure the hole is plenty wide, actually twice as wide as you might think necessary, because those roots are going to need to grow outwards. Roots grow out more than they do down because water and nutrients are close to the surface, and that's where the roots need to intercept them. And then return the topsoil first, return the subsoil and then the topsoil when you fill the hole back in. Now, mulch is a great way to keep the soil underneath a tree moist and cool, and also to keep down competition from other vegetation. Even grass can compete with the tree roots. And if you have a bowl-shaped rim around the sapling, that will serve as a way to hold the moisture better in the circle that surrounds that sapling. And make sure you do water saplings for the first couple of years during any period of droughts. And winter can be a hazardous time for trees because there are a lot of hungry critters out there, such as rabbits and rodents and deer that might girdle a tree simply by eating the bark that is nourishing to animals. So you might consider protecting the sapling in some way. Now, Virginia creeper has fruits that are edible for birds, but people cannot eat that fruit. People and birds do both appreciate grapes, and here's a fruit that mockingbirds and catbirds in particular will eat, the wild honeysuckle, and they'll also nest in the honeysuckle vines. Bearberry is a ground cover with fruit that birds can eat, and it's a beautiful evergreen ground cover that grows in full sun. And sunflower, of course, birds love it. And but there are many other flowers that birds can eat the seeds of. In addition, there's the black-eyed Susan. You can see the family resemblance between sunflower and black-eyed Susan. This is the aster family, or Asteraceae it's called. Another one from the aster family, the purple coneflower. And all of the plants shown here, except for sedum, are also in the aster family and have seed that birds can eat. So it's a good idea to leave your seed stalk standing in the winter. Not only flowers, but grasses as well have edible seeds for birds. And those plants will also be habitat for insects. And speaking of habitat, if you leave the leaves under, don't rake the leaves under a tree, and leave them for the insects, and particularly the caterpillars will drop down from the foliage at the end of the summer, and they need to find a place to hide. So if there are leaves or vegetation, they can do that. But if there's just bare ground or grass, there's no place for a caterpillar to spend the winter. Leave the dead trees and snags standing if you can. There's a kind of a wild and wonderful beauty about them, but also their habitat for wildlife. Brush piles are also a way that small critters can find sanctuary, shelter, and food. And so to review, there are 4 things that birds and other animals need to survive: food, water, shelter, and places to rear their young. And when you landscape for nature, all of those 4 things can be part of the plan, and birds' needs and other wildlife needs will be met. Unfortunately, too often, our standards of neatness and appearance really rule out any kind of wildlife habitat. So it all started back 4 centuries ago when members of the British aristocracy were showing off to everyone how rich they were. They didn't need to grow food on their land, at least not all of it, and they could have these vast lawns that they would pay people to scythe and keep in a neat and orderly appearance. So unfortunately, that status symbol or that standard has continued to the present day, but lawns are a food desert, a polluter, and a resource guzzler. We use far more pesticides on our lawns per acre than farmers do, and an unconscionable amount of water as well. So unfortunately, Kentucky bluegrass is on life support because it's not a native grass. It comes from Europe, where summers are more moist, but such is not the and cool, but such is not the case in the United States. So it's a high maintenance lawn, and so you might consider a turf type tall fescue, which needs less fertilizer, less watering, less mowing. You can grow it in shade or sun. The roots of this grass go down as deep as 4 feet, making it so hardy, and yet the appearance is just as good as the grass that we're used to. But basically, reconsider grass. Marianne Borgia has a wonderful website, thenaturalweb.org. She wrote this article, A Wildlife, Family, and Pet-Friendly Lawn. And she suggests that if you have a place where the lawn is not doing too well, either due to shade, standing water, or erosion, why not plant native perennials, shrubs, and trees to bring in the wildlife? So I encourage you to visit Marianne Borgia's website. She has just a lot of informative articles and great photography as well. Environmental organizations are asking us to reduce our lawns by at least 25%. I think that's a reasonable goal, and one that will not only be helpful to wildlife, but will improve our own quality of life as well, because it really enriches our experiences of nature to be able to witness what's happening on land where there's so much going on, both in terms of plant life and the animals that are attracted to the plants. But some people have concerns about natural landscaping. For example, whether they will attract vermin, which is actually not the case. And Lyme disease, ticks can be a legitimate concern, certainly, but they can't access people unless they make contact with you. So if you have setbacks or paths for walking, it will be impossible for a tick to be able to grab onto you. But usually ticks are waiting on branches or the end of a blade of grass or something, and hoping that some animal will pass by, and then they can grab onto your clothing or skin, and so that's not possible if you don't come into contact with vegetation. I invite you to visit LymeDisease.org for more information about preventing ticks. If you want to use a repellent, any of these 4 ingredients is effective. And permethrin is an amazing way to not only repel, but actually kills the ticks and mosquitoes, chiggers, mites, other insects if you spray your clothing or gear with at least 48 hours before use. It's a great way to make sure that ticks are not a problem for you or your members of your family. And it lasts through 6 washings, remarkably, or through 70 washings if you buy factory treated clothing. So that's permethrin. Tick predators are also effective in managing tick populations, and that's another reason to have natural landscapes. Mosquitoes don't need to be a problem in natural landscapes either. In fact, long-standing puddles are more likely to occur when there's not enough vegetation that natural landscapes would provide to absorb that water. A water feature such as a pond is a great way to attract wildlife, but if you're concerned about the mosquito larvae, keep in mind that those larvae need stagnant water to mature. So you can keep the water in motion with a solar activated pump. You could also stock your pond with fish that eat those larvae, such as koi goldfish or mosquito fish. And finally, there's a bacterium called BTI, and the products, mosquito dunks or mosquito bits, if you add them to the water, are very effective at killing the mosquito larvae and are safe for other wildlife. Allergenic pollen is actually more of a problem due to non-native plants and grasses than any plants that would be established in natural landscaping. For example, ragweed, the #1, public enemy #1, there's so much wind-borne pollen from that weed. Also, lamb's quarters, redroot amaranth, English plantain, and a variety of grasses are really the issue for pollen, for allergy sufferers due to pollen. And lastly, the property value can actually be enhanced by natural landscaping. It's been demonstrated that planting a single tree can add to your property value by thousands of dollars. And so the entire landscape, tastefully designed and just with a beautiful array of plants and of different colors at all seasons, is definitely going to add to the value of your property. Massing one species of plant can be a dramatic touch on a landscape. Covering your foundation is a good way to make the transition from the land to the house more appealing. Also, you'll see that bird bath and the potted plant there and paths. All of this makes it look less haphazard and more orderly and planned. Crisp edges and bold patterns also have that effect. But one thing you're not going to want on your property is invasive plants. So make sure that you know what they look like, or get assistance from someone who does, so they can help you inventory your land to be aware of what invasive plants are problematic, and then learn how to either eradicate or control them. Japanese knotweed is a really pernicious plant that can get quite tall. It reminds some people of bamboo, but it's actually not a bamboo at all. But it's impossible to uproot Japanese knotweed simply because when you dig up some of the root, other little pieces of root remain in the ground, and you have more than you had before of these shoots coming up. One effective way is to spread out, after you cut everything down using a scythe or other means, if you cut them all to the ground and then cover with a heavy piece of black plastic, a sturdy black plastic, then and just starve them for a couple of, at least 2 or 3 years would be required to make sure that nothing no Japanese knotweed roots are able to keep sending up those shoots. Oriental bittersweet is a vine that does a lot of damage. It actually kills trees by girdling them. If you have any vines on your property of Oriental bittersweet that have reached the canopy of trees, you should lop them off at the base to make sure that they don't flower and set seed, because birds will eat those seed and carry them far and wide. Autumn olive is a shrub that's become far too common and invasive. So this is also the case for multiflora rose and the bush honeysuckles. And then burning bush is a tree that is not it's not permissible for nurseries to even sell burning bush in Massachusetts anymore because it's so invasive. And then there are the herbaceous plants, goutweed, garlic mustard, and black swallowwort, for example, that also cause problems to homeowners. So 31 different invasive plants in Massachusetts are described at the masslive.com website, and I encourage you to educate yourself, or as I mentioned, you could invite someone who does recognize these plants to check out your property to make sure you're aware of what's going on there, because they can really foil your efforts at natural landscaping. And it's also the case that birds prefer native fruits such as blueberries, black cherries, and black raspberries. When they're migrating, they need real nutrition that's high quality, and they turn up their beaks at the fruits of Japanese barberry, oriental bittersweet, multiflora rose. Even when they're abundant and easily found, those birds will seek out their native fruits that they prefer. Surprisingly, the poison ivy is actually a native vine and belongs in our landscape in terms of its interactions with nature, and birds can eat those white fruits in the winter as a food source. But if you want to control poison ivy anywhere on your property where people might come in contact with it, one way to do that is just to mow everything to the ground and cover it with cardboard or newspaper. This is a way to transition from any unwanted vegetation, whether it's a lawn, weeds, poison ivy, what have you. You don't need to dig that area. Simply smother it with cardboard overlapped by several inches so that no vegetation will be able to wend its way in between the pieces. Newspaper should be at least 6 sheets thick in order to suffice as a barrier layer. And then if you're planting a vegetable garden where you want a lot of nutrition, you can add compost right on top of that cardboard or newspaper. But compost is not necessary if you're planting a pollinator garden, for example, because in most cases, no additional fertility is required. That the parent soil should be adequate, and unless for some reason you really have very poor soil. And in fact, fertility can give the upper hand to the weeds, which just really flourish in high nitrogen situations, where the native plants are used to being able to do fine in even paltry settings of soil nutrients. So, and this photo on the lower right here, there's a product called builder's paper, which painters use to keep paint from messing up the floor when they're painting the walls and ceilings. So you can use the same product for larger projects in which you're trying to transition from unwanted vegetation to a pollinator garden. So mulch suppresses weeds. It also keeps the soil moist and cool, and it enriches the soil. And all those are really essential to mulch. Is always the top layer of sheet mulching. And if you're planting an annual bed for a traditional vegetable garden, grass clippings, straw, shredded leaves, and pine straw or pine needles are all acceptable. But for perennial beds, even though shredded leaves work okay, they're going to decompose faster. So, and pine needles again are a good choice because they don't decompose very rapidly. One word about pine needles is that it's not true that they make the soil acidic. That's a myth that's been passed down for quite a while, but science has demonstrated that that's not the case. Pine bark, wood chips, chip branch wood are all options for for the mulch layer when you do sheet mulching. But please don't use dyed mulch. It's often contaminated with creosote and CCA, which is harmful to the plants. And also, please don't mound mulch around a tree. That will invite it to send out roots where those roots should not grow. They will then become exposed as the mulch decomposes and make the tree weaker. And think of mulch as a temporary expediency, because once the plants have commanded the area which you want them to do, the soil no longer needs to be protected from the weeds, weed seeds coming in, or kept moist and cool. The plants themselves are doing that job. This is a rain garden, incidentally, so the rain is being funneled right into that area, that garden bed, and you see how happy those plants are with that arrangement, and they've just taken complete control of that area, and no mulch is necessary. So often in landscapes we see just a plant here, a plant there, in a sea of mulch, and mulch is just, that's not how mulch is supposed to be used. It's really just while you're waiting for those plants to get big enough and create a tapestry, if you will, of vegetation. Then they're certainly helpful to keep the weeds out and keep the soil moist and cool. Another way to do those to protect the soil is to plant ground covers, and because not only do they prevent weeds and keep the soil moist and cool, but they also hold the soil in place on slopes. Bearberry is a ground cover that I've already mentioned that birds like. Thyme is one that's good for bees because the flowers of thyme have thyme oil, which helps to protect them from diseases that are carried by varroa mites. Here's a beautiful ground cover, 3-leaved cinquefoil. It's an evergreen, but some leaves turn color in the fall. And then golden star, or green and gold, is beautiful yellow flowers. And a ground cover that manages to do fine in fairly deep shade, wild ginger. Then there's bishop's hat, which again is shade tolerant and beautiful foliage and flowers. Our native Pachysandra, which is I think more beautiful than the ubiquitous Japanese version of Pachysandra that you see so often. Barren strawberry is another native ground cover that blooms in the spring and does a very effective. It's very effective at blanketing the soil and keeping out unwanted weeds. And wild strawberry, while it may not keep out weeds quite as well, it is a beautiful plant and is very beneficial for wildlife. Now, hummingbirds are also beneficial because they're both predators and pollinators, and they are excellent hunters for a variety of different kinds of insects. They need those insects for protein. Ruby-throated hummingbirds are the only hummingbird you're likely to see here in Massachusetts, and their population has doubled in the last 5 decades. So we don't need to be concerned about how well they're doing at this time, but people love to invite hummingbirds, and they're such charming birds to watch. And they love moving water. They also appreciate places to rest. Snags for perches can be provided for that purpose. And if you leave dead trees, the yellow-bellied sapsuckers can make holes in those trees, and then the hummingbird will help itself to the sap and the insects that are attracted to the sap. Hummingbirds also need spider silk to make their nests. And the reason for this is that as the hummingbird chicks hatch and grow, the nest will double in size. It's a flexible nest due to that ingredient of the spider silk. It's okay to rescue a hummingbird chick, or any other bird for that matter, if you find it on the ground, but don't hang around a nest and watch the chicks and take pictures and that sort of thing, because that will attract the attention of predators to the nest. Hummingbird feeders are easier to clean if there's this kind of design, two hemispherical bowl-shaped elements that screw one into the other. And so you can take it apart to feed it and then reassemble it. You're going to want to use only water and sugar. No substitutes such as honey or brown sugar or molasses are acceptable. Just straight sugar, 4-to-1 ratio, no food coloring. There's plenty of red on the bird feeder itself to attract the hummingbird. You would heat that mixture to dissolve it and then refrigerate, use within 1 week, and replace the food in the feeder every few days, clean the feeder every 3 days. You'll need to use hot tap water, scrub the sides thoroughly. Don't use soap because soap residue is harmful for hummingbirds. Black mold can also appear in hummingbird feeders, and that will then need to be cleaned with a solution, a dilute bleach solution, 1:64 ratio for 1 hour. And be vigilant. If the nectar becomes cloudy, it is spoiled and needs to be replaced. Nectar may start to ferment in just 1 day. And so I hope that I've impressed on you the need to be vigilant if you have a hummingbird feeder, but also consider that flowers will never have nectar that turns bad. And the abundance, and not only that, but the quality of the nectar, just the right balance of different kinds of sugars, also the different minerals, proteins, amino acids that are offered in that flower make it an ideal food source for hummingbirds. And the trumpet creeper is a robust vine. I do not suggest that you grow it near your house because it can do some damage to that structure, to details of your house, to different fixtures. However, if you have a place on your property where that it won't have a chance to do that kind of damage, so any place that will give support to a vine, consider the trumpet creeper, or the trumpet honeysuckle is another one that hummingbirds love. And hummingbirds are very attracted to the color red, and you can't get much redder than cardinal flower. This is a plant that does well in wet situations. You shouldn't let it dry out, although a normal garden setting would be fine. Wild columbine in the spring, it's in bloom and then is a food source for migrated hummingbirds that have just arrived on their migration back to New England. Butterfly weed is another one that hummingbirds will visit, Anis hyssop. So you notice that it's not just red flowers that hummingbirds come to. Blazing star, swamp milkweed, foxglove beard tongue, purple coneflower, and any flock species. And bats are also beneficial organisms because they eat nothing but insects and control insect populations. Little brown bat and the big brown bat are the two that are most common here in New England. And the population of little brown bat has been decimated by the fungal disease called white nose syndrome. So we can offer clean bat houses that won't have that fungus lurking in them, either by making your own or buying one online. Mass.gov is a good resource for learning how to make and position bat houses. You're not allowed to evict bats during the summer because that's when they're raising their pups. Mass.gov will also describe how to evict bats safely and humanely. Leave dead trees standing for bats. Don't use pesticides. Keep your cats indoors because a cat can decimate the bat roost if it discovers where those bats are. Artificial lighting disturbs bats. And now lepidopterans, the butterflies and moths that are so alluring and intriguing to us. The butterflies actually are active in the day but are nowhere near as common as moths. There are 20 times as many moths as butterflies, but we just don't see them that much because they are more active at night. Moths have feathered antennae while butterflies have club-tipped antennae. Butterflies make chrysalises and moths spin cocoons. Butterfly populations in Ohio were measured to decline by 33% in just 2 decades. And habitat loss, pesticides, and climate change are responsible for this kinds of alarming decrease in lepidopterans that has been noticed all over the world, really. And in fact, flying insects in general are in big trouble. A couple of years ago, a German study documented that the biomass of flying insects had declined more than 75% in just 27 years. And those kinds of figures have been found elsewhere in the world as well. So they're calling it a bug apocalypse. And we really cannot tolerate such a, the extinction of insects would be a calamity. We'd have, the plants would suffer, of course, because they wouldn't, and many of them would become extinct because their flowers wouldn't be pollinated and they wouldn't be able to set seed. Birds wouldn't have insects for a food source, and their populations would continue to plummet as well. Some insects are responsible for decomposition, and they are also the base of the food chain that many other animals need. So butterfly gardening is one way to do our part to help insects. Not only butterflies, but many other insects will come to visit a butterfly garden. Sun is maybe 6 hours a day or so would be adequate. A water source is handy. Shelter from the wind is helpful. Host plants are absolutely essential because you can't have adult butterflies unless you have caterpillars. And you'll want to provide plants that are in bloom throughout the growing season and use organic landscaping practices. Butterflies never visit butterfly boxes. No one's ever found a butterfly in a butterfly box, only spiders and wasps and other insects, but never a butterfly. Butterflies do, however, appreciate mud. It's the males that will sip the mud and get the minerals that are in the mud, use those minerals to produce pheromones, which attract the females to them. And then when they mate with the females, they contribute those minerals to the females, which are needed for production of the eggs. So we can give those butterflies mud with a converted bird bath or a shallow, at the ground level, a saucer nestled in the ground. You can use gravel or sand, and for the minerals, add salt or compost and keep it moist. And butterflies love fruit, and sometimes even when fruit is going bad, they don't seem to mind. So that could be interesting to see what butterflies might be attracted to fruit. So we need to give butterfly and moth larvae enough plants and the right kinds of plants to mature into adults. And when we look at our native perennials that are herbaceous and grasses, goldenrod is the top host plant. 125 different species of caterpillars visit the goldenrod. Strawberry, sunflower, and bird's foot trefoil are also in that top 4 host plants, but there are many others that are valuable as well. And trees and shrubs are even more so. 473 different kinds of caterpillars can eat those leaves of an oak tree. And then the genus Prunus, beet plum, cherry, chokecherry, host plants for 411 different species. Willows, also an important host plant, and so is birch and a number of other trees. There are some butterflies that can only use a select 1 or 2 different plants because the caterpillars can't eat any other leaf. For example, spicebush swallowtail females need to lay their eggs on either a spicebush or a sassafras tree. Incidentally, those things that look like eyes on the sides of the caterpillars there are actually just adornments on the skin that are designed to look like eyes to scare a predator. I'm sure they can see, but their eyes are most likely closer to their mouth and are not visible to us. Black swallowtails caterpillars can eat the leaves of any of these members of the parsley family. Turtlehead and plantain are host plants for the Baltimore checker spot. New Jersey tea, viburnums, meadowsweet, and dogwoods are hosts for the spring azure, that tiny and beautiful blue butterfly. And then those gorgeous fritillary butterflies. The host plant is violet, the common blue violet that grows in many lawns. Everyone knows about monarchs. It's perhaps the best known butterfly in our country. And we're inspired by the amazing migratory journey that they're able to accomplish every year. And they can't do it without milkweed, because caterpillars only eat milkweed leaves. Now, the common milkweed is the one that you're likely to find in fields, but I don't recommend that you plant common milkweed in your garden bed. The reason for this is that they're just way too aggressive. They send out subterranean runners and will pop up everywhere and just take control of the entire garden. So instead of the common milkweed, I recommend swamp milkweed or butterfly weed for sunny gardens and poke milkweed for a shady garden. As the name implies, swamp milkweed does well in very wet places, but an ordinary garden is fine as well. Butterfly weed does well in dry places, but again, normal conditions would be satisfactory. So both swamp milkweed and butterfly weed could be grown in most people's butterfly gardens, and they're beautiful plants, and they are host plants for the milkweed as well, for the monarch as well. Monarch Watch has been monitoring populations that overwinter in Mexico for many years now, and the declines in populations are due primarily to the use of glyphosate, which kills so many milkweed plants and just makes it difficult for the monarchs to find their host plants in order to lay their eggs. You can proclaim to the world that you have a monarch way station by ordering this sign from Monarch Watch. And here is an example of a monarch way station offered by edibleterrace.com. Notice you don't need a heck of a lot of land to do a basic garden, and just 12 different species is adequate. Two of those are grasses, incidentally. Also notice that the flowers are clumped together, different flowers of different species, which makes it easier for the pollinators, including the butterflies, to just go from one flower to the next when that flower is in bloom. Sharon Stichter created a list of her top 15 butterfly plants for the North American Butterfly Association. NABA.org is a great resource to learn about butterflies. And first on her list was butterfly bush. It certainly is popular with butterflies and very popular with gardeners, because there's no question that butterflies are attracted to it. However, it's not a host plant for any butterfly or moth species, because it's a non-native plant. And furthermore, it seems that butterfly bush is currently invasive in a number of states, including Massachusetts, and will most likely become more so as the climate changes. So native plants, again, are vastly preferable. There's this beautiful small shrub, New Jersey tea, sweet pepper bush, quite attractive, compass plant, the tall perennial that butterflies visit, a blazing star, a beautiful wildflower, thistle, any of the asters, purple coneflower, another great butterfly plant, scabiosa, Joe pieweed, which is a tall perennial that grows in wet areas, but will do fine in a normal garden as well. And the same could be said of boneset, and the milkweeds, which I've already mentioned, the swamp milkweed and the butterfly weed in particular. Zinnias are among the annuals that you can plant for butterflies, also Mexican sunflower and marigolds. Now, when you're planning your gardens, do consider the possibility that some hungry vegetarians out there might be eager to eat them. And so you can find lists of deer-resistant native plants at these two locations at New England Wildflower Society and Cornell Cooperative Extension. Cornell Cooperative Extension will also give you information about groundhog-resistant plants, and rabbits are also eager vegetarians. Visit the Pennsylvania State University um, Extension Service to learn about them. And butterfly container gardening is an option if you don't have too much land. The bigger the pot, the better, because you won't have to irrigate it quite so often, and you'll be able to fit more plants into it. People call the strip between their sidewalk and the street a hell strip, because sometimes the conditions, growing conditions, can be difficult, a lot of salt added and that sort of thing, but you can find plants that will tolerate those conditions and transform it to a heaven strip for butterflies and for people who, passersby, who will enjoy the beauty that you've created. Susanna Lerman has documented that if lawns are mowed every other week instead of every week, that allows the small lawn flowers to bloom, such as the common blue violet and clover, wild strawberry. In fact, the clover has been used to be part of a seed mix. When you bought grass seed, there'd be clover seed in there too, because it's well known that clover enriches the soil. That was before we had this new standard that lawns needed to look like perfect carpets. And there are a number of other beautiful little flowers that'll bloom. 111 species of native bees visited those lawns that were mowed every other week. And you can also be proactive about planting in the seeds that that will do well in lawns. If you search Pollinate Northampton, which is there's a list of plant seeds that can be sowed in this way at that website, Pollinate Northampton. And wildflower meadows are a possibility if you have 400 square feet or more, which isn't all that much area. And of course, larger meadows are also a possibility. It's a project to create a wildflower meadow. You need to devote at least a year to eliminating vegetation and the seeds of any plants that would come up that are lurking in the seed bed. And that can be done a variety of ways. I do invite you to do your homework and to consider engaging the services of a professional landscaper who'd be able to help you, but also the companies that sell these wildflower meadow seeds would be sources of expertise. So consider that after the initial investment, which whatever costs are involved in killing the existing vegetation and buying the seed itself, can be recouped over time because you won't need to be mowing every other week. You could save a lot of money that way, and the money that you would save in making amendments to the soil and all that sort of thing, you would never need to do that for a meadow. So just one mowing in the spring to make sure that any saplings and that or other unwanted vegetation would be cut down, and then if the land is prepared well, that is the key to the success of a wildflower meadow. Now, bees are also beneficial organisms because they're the best pollinators. That's due to their fuzzy bodies that pick up pollen much better than other insects do. And the honeybee is the most numerous, most common bee in our landscape. And yet it's a non-native that was brought here intentionally by British colonists for honey and for other products that beeswax, for example, that colonists could use. But there are a lot of other bees that were here before the honeybee arrived, and there are actually 400 different native bees, a variety of sizes and shapes, and they are a very important part of our ecosystem. Honeybees do make honey and they pollinate a lot of crops. But if honeybees were to become extinct, it would not be a calamity for the environment because native plants don't require honeybees for pollination. They can make do fine with the services of bees and wasps, for that matter, that are also pollinators. People sometimes call a yellow jacket a bee, but you can see that yellow jacket is actually a wasp. The difference is that wasps have little to no hair and their legs dangle when they fly. Bumblebees are a kind of all of our bumblebees are native bees, and there are a number of different species. Just like honeybees, they have pollen baskets on their hind legs. Pollen is a great source of protein for the bees, and they have colonies just like honeybees do, but they're smaller colonies, maybe hundreds instead of thousands of individuals, which is the case for honeybees. And the female has to start that colony from scratch every spring. So she's going to need to forage a lot of pollen and nectar to meet her own nutritional needs and also to raise her brood. So flowers that are blooming in spring are very important to bumblebees. This is what a colony would look like after it's been established. Bumblebees can vibrate. It's called buzz pollination when they vibrate the flowers. This is a tomato flower here. The pollen is inside the anthers. So by vibrating their bodies, their thoracic muscles at just the right frequency, the pollen is dislodged and lands on their bodies. And for this reason, growers of tomatoes will offer boxes for the bumblebees to have their colonies right there in the tomato greenhouses. Raspberries, cranberries, blueberries, strawberries, cucumbers are all pollinated by bumblebees. And there are some native plants as well that are exclusively for bumblebees. The turtlehead, for example, no other bee is strong enough to make its way all the way down into the base of that flower and help itself to the abundant and delicious nectar awaiting. And so that turtlehead is really creating brand loyalty with a bumblebee, because once it has that satisfying meal, it's going to look for other flowers just like it. And that's how flowers are pollinated, when pollen is delivered from one plant to another. Another exclusively bumblebee pollinated plant, the bottle gentian. This blossom will not open any more than what you see. So the bumblebee can actually force its way into that flower. No other bee can. We used to have a lot of rusty-patched bumblebees. They are gone from New England now and endangered elsewhere. American bumblebees are also much reduced all over their range. There are two kinds of bumblebees that actually have increased their populations in Massachusetts over the years, the two-spotted bumblebee and the common eastern bumblebee, but others have not done so well. In fact, many have become extinct in our area. So that's due to climate change and loss of habitat, but also pests, pathogens, pesticides, poor nutrition, pollution, because it's hard for bees to smell the flowers if there's pollution in the air, and the plants that are non-natives and invasives and crowding out the plants that they need are all causes of bumblebee decline. And pesticides are dangerous not only due to their the well-known ingredients, the so-called active ingredients, but there are also inert ingredients which companies don't need to disclose. That and the study in Britain demonstrated that Roundup no glyphosate, for example, even though there was none of that active ingredient, the inert ingredients were incredibly toxic to bumblebees. We can leave abandoned mouse and bird nests for bumblebee habitat, so they can make their colonies there. Leave it be landscaping in general is good for all wildlife. But consider that leave it be landscaping doesn't mean that you just stop mowing and see what happens. Because I can tell you what'll happen. You'll get a lot of invasive plants coming in. You'll get a tangle of vegetation that's not necessarily either attractive to humans or useful for people, for nature. So I'm I'm quite sure that in this photo on the left, this didn't just happen by accident. Those purple coneflowers were planted, and so were the grasses. And now they're doing just fine on their own. You can offer bumblebee nesting boxes, although you're not guaranteed that bumblebees will use them. Maybe you'll have a 20% chance of occupancy. And there are some insects that pretend to be bumblebees. Evolution has given them that protection so that the predators will think twice before trying to make a meal of them. Sweat bees are another native bee that they're small, they're beautiful, and many colors. They're called sweat bees because they're attracted to our perspiration. And they're generalists, so they're able to eat the pollen of many different kinds of flowers. Another remarkable ground-dwelling bee is the plasterer bee. The female is actually able to make a kind of a plastic bag at the bottom of that cavity to raise her, after laying the egg on the side and provisioning that cavity with bee bread, a combination of the pollen and nectar. She'll actually seal up that bag, and in that way the egg will be protected from the elements and from other predators, and safely make it through the winter and then emerge in the spring. So you can offer habitat for ground nesting bees by creating an area that's several yards across. Loose, well-drained soil works well. Flat areas or earthen banks that are sunny and south-facing are optimal as well. Also, soil-filled planters can be satisfactory, and stay off the area because you don't want to do any damage to the ground nesting bees' habitats. Some grasses can also offer habitat to ground nesting bees by because there's bare ground under those drooping blades of grass that's available for the ground nesting bees. Now, mason bees are not ground nesting. They are actually cavity nesting bees, and the blue orchard mason bee is called an orchard bee because they are so effective at pollinating the flowers of fruit trees. Honeybees are likely just to move to fly from one flower to the next on the same tree. That does no good to the tree at all in terms of pollinator services, however. But until it finally decides to go to a different tree. But the blue orchard mason bee and other mason bees will more likely leave that tree and go to a different tree and then pollinate it, the flower there. So it takes many more honeybees to do the job of a few mason bees. Now, as you can see, mud has that photo on the left. The mason bee is actually delivering mud to the cavity where she has laid her egg and provisioned it with bee bread, and she will then seal the cavity with mud. Incidentally, I do not suggest that you use bamboo tubes for a honeybee hotel, a mason bee hotel, as in this picture, because bamboo tubes do not breathe very well. Remarkably, leafcutter bees are able to cut these perfect circles out of leaf blades and then roll them up and insert them into cavities where they will then lay their eggs. And leafcutter bees pollinate blueberries, onions, carrots, and alfalfa, among other flowers. Here are some of the leaves that leafcutter bees use to accomplish that. And I was so proud when I found those telltale circular holes on the margins of the tick trefoil plants in my pollinator garden last year. I knew that I was that I had leafcutter bees and I was helping them out. The photo in the lower right is our rose leaves, and those are among the leaves that leafcutter bees will use. And if you have rose bushes, please don't panic. Those plants, even though they might look a little bit funny for a while, it's not going to destroy your shrubs. There'll be plenty of leaf surface area for that plant to survive. So this block of wood had 3 holes drilled in it, and you can see the top hole was used by a leafcutter bee, and there must be at least a half dozen separate chambers here, everyone surrounded by leaf blades, and that the leafcutter bee used for that purpose. Rosin bees used rosin to create the chambers, separating and protecting protecting the larvae, and then the cocoons of the mason bee are visible here with the mud partitioning the chambers. So there are a number of different plants that you can use for cavity nesting bees. Rather than creating bee hotels, just consider leaving these plants standing over the winter, and trust that the bees will find them. Bees can use those stems whether they are still in the vertical position or in the horizontal position. It doesn't really matter to them. So there are a wide variety of stems for cavity nesting bees. If you do decide to do a bee hotel, Japanese knotweed, incidentally, is an ideal use of that invasive plant. The dead stalks from last year can be cut into sections and inserted in that protected box. And if you roll pieces of paper around a dowel or a pencil and insert them into those stalks, then you can remove them at the end of the season and discard the diseased cocoons, save the ones that are healthy, and put them in the refrigerator over the winter, and put them in a release box in the spring when danger of severe cold weather has passed, and you'll be helping bees in this way. Some of the bees that are magnets for some of the flowers that are magnets for native bees include wild bergamot. This is the beautiful plant, and there's no plant that attracts as many as 15 native bee genera except wild bergamot. If you're familiar with bee balm, which has bright red flowers, it's a close relative of wild bergamot. In second place, black-eyed Susan, attracting 14 native bee genera. And in third place, boneset. And then tied for fourth, swamp milkweed, butterfly weed, tickseed, oxeye sunflower, mountain mint, blue vervain, and a word about mountain mint, one of my favorite pollinator plants. You'll see the great black wasp here visiting it, which is a harmless wasp. A tachetid fly is a beneficial insect, a bumblebee. There's so many different insects that are attracted to these flowers. And while they aren't particularly showy, there's something about them that's irresistible to a wide variety of insects. It's a lesson in entomology when you just watch what's happening on a patch of mountain mint. An added bonus is that if you crush the leaves and apply it to your skin, it's an effective mosquito repellent. You can also have a cup of mountain mint tea, incidentally. Tastes a lot like spearmint. So foxglove, beard tongue, cup plant, New England aster, golden alexanders are also popular with native bees. Big leaf aster, wild geranium, yellow coneflower, anise hyssop, purple coneflower, Jacob's ladder, Ohio spiderwort, ironweed, a very tall perennial, culver's root, you can grow it in the shade, harebell, wild lupin, and bloodroot, the spring ephemeral, round out the list of herbaceous perennials that attract at least 7 native bee genera. Please avoid cultivars. There are 100 different cultivars for purple coneflower, which the natural plant itself looks like this, the purple coneflower, but all these different cultivars have been created genetically by plant breeders, and you'll know they're cultivars if you see single quotation marks around a name like Green Jewel, Magnus, or Double Delight. The problem is that pollinators can't even see Green Jewel. They see colors differently than us, so they won't be inclined to visit it. And these other pollinator plants, other cultivars, are inferior as pollinator plants because they don't have They either have no nectar or pollen or not as much as the original species. And there are other problems with cultivars. Not only is there less nutrition for pollinators in many cases, but there's less genetic variation because they've been inbred. So they're more vulnerable to pests and diseases than the original straight species. They may not even be open pollinated or self-seed, and they might be less adapted to local soils and climates, so they can be difficult to establish and maintain. They may also distract pollinators from visiting wild plants, and they may hybridize with native species, affecting their survivability. Now, there's some plants that are that are favorites with gardeners, but are worthless or nearly so to pollinators, and they include, and most these are also non-native plants: the pansy, the daylily, hybrid tea rose. There's nothing there for pollinators, or double marigold, the same situation. Petunia, New Guinea impatiens, begonia, peony, and forsythia all have very low value for wildlife. Now, remember, the beneficials include not only the pollinators, but also the predators and parasites that control pest populations. So while spiders and praying mantises are generalists, and they eat a lot of insects for sure, but they eat everything they can find, the most valuable predators and parasites are those that especially control the populations of pest insects. So lacewing larvae, for example, are the ones that are voracious hunters of mealybugs, spider mites, thrips, aphids, caterpillars, and then as adults, they pollinate flowers. And you can make a lacewing hotel from a bottle that with a bottom cut out, a piece of cardboard rolled up and inserted inside, and then hung from a tree. Ladybug larvae, ladybug beetle larvae also are effective hunters of pest insects. And as the adult, ladybug beetle will be a pollinator. Pine cones in a mesh bag serve as a ladybug hotel. Fireflies are beneficial organisms because they prey on insect larvae, snails, and slugs, offer them low-hanging trees, forest litter, long grasses, ponds, and streams. Don't use synthetic fertilizer or pesticides, and please turn off your outdoor lights, which distract fireflies when they're mating. Assassin bugs are effective predators, as are hoverflies or syrphid flies. And again, it's the larvae that does the pest control. And as adults, those syrphid flies are pollinating flowers. Now, here's a tiny little parasite, not a predator, but a parasite, a trichogramma wasp. They are able to lay their eggs in the eggs of much larger insect species, and that kills the egg of the host, and then the trichogramma wasp is able to survive in that way. Bracketed wasps, there's such an impressive variety of them, many different species that specialize on parasitizing many different pest insects. So attracting predators and parasites with flowers for the adults, it makes a lot of sense. And Queen Anne's lace, dill, fennel are members of the Apiaceae family that will bring them in. Members of the aster family, Asteraceae, goldenrod, tansy, marigold, and dandelion, also boneset, yarrow, coreopsis, and aster, among others. And then members of the mint family, Lamiaceae, the horse mint, a really beautiful relative. It's a mint relative of the bee balm and the wild bergamot, and wasps just love it. And again, wasps usually are harmless, and they're certainly not interested in harming you when they're busy pollinating flowers. Bugleweed is a common lawn flower that pops up in many people's lawns. And again, the wild bergamot, anisesept, just great all-purpose pollinator plants. Now, natural control of garden pests is known as IPM, or integrated pest management, to farmers. And really, you could think of it as intelligent pest management, because why would anyone want to harm the very insects that are the heroes of the pollinators and the predators and parasites that are controlling pest populations? So instead of using toxic chemicals, barriers that bar access to the plants, such as in gardens and farms, such as floating row covers. Companion plants can sometimes be effective at repelling the pests. Hand picking can sometimes be feasible, and organic pesticides are preferable to the synthetics. Consider that even though we typically think of wildflowers as being the best pollinator plants, trees and shrubs are also quite effective and valuable. For example, I can't think of a better pollinator plant than willow trees that have early spring blooming flowers that are visited by vast numbers and variety of insects that are hungry in the spring and need those nutritional resources. And there are witch hazels that bloom in both spring and fall. There's the gorgeous redbud pollinator tree. Fruit trees are also good for pollinators, including our Native American plum and our beach plum. The black cherry and choke cherry, both for birds and the bees. Virginia rose and Carolina rose, also rugosa rose. The Juneberry, visited by pollinators. Maples and oaks, even though they don't have showy flowers, do have pollen and nectar, and the bees make use of them. Basswood, very appealing and attractive to bees. High bush blueberry and low bush blueberry are pollinated by bumblebees. Red osier dogwood is a pollinator plant. So is ninebark, very attractive to pollinators of all kinds. Unfortunately, the cultivars are again problematic in this case because the purple leaves of many of those ninebark cultivars are inedible and don't serve as host plants for insects such as the ninebark leaf beetle. Winterberry Haily is an example of another plant that's both for the birds and the bees. Staghorn sumac, likewise. Look at all those honeybees visiting that inflorescence on the left. Viburnums as well. And we have native hydrangeas, the panicle hydrangea and the smooth hydrangea are native hydrangeas. Mountain laurel can grow in the shade and visited by butterflies and other pollinators. Consider spring ephemerals being able to grow underneath trees when before the leaves are shading that area. Before the trees leaf out, those flowers are able to make good use of the sunlight and they get a jump on the season and are quite valuable to pollinators for that reason. The snowdrops, the crocuses, grape hyacinth, Siberian squill, wild bleeding heart is a native perennial. So is bloodroot, a spring ephemeral. And then annuals are also valuable as pollinator plants. The sunflower, Mexican sunflower, zinnia, spider flower, Ageratum sweetilissum, borage, sage, cosmos. And then think about your culinary herbs. If you're growing herbs for culinary purposes and allow them to flower, basil, chives, rosemary, oregano, lavender, and catmint are all valuable for pollinators. Kathy Neal has provided this valuable service, a flowering calendar for native pollinator plants that will show you when and how long the different plants will bloom and what the color of their bloom is. So you can use a chart like this to plan your garden and be aware that you're going to want ideally at least 3 flowers blooming at all times, and you're going to want maybe at least 3 to 5 individuals of each species, and you can accomplish this with a pollinator garden about 100 square feet at least area. So this is a valuable chart when you're planning, and Kathy Neal has done the research to demonstrate that the plants on this list are the ones that are the most beneficial for our pollinators. Now, the best way to acquire a lot of plants and of a variety of types is buying seeds. They're much less expensive than buying the plants themselves. And you can get a lot of plants from each seed packet. Some seeds need to be pre-treated with an extended period of damp and cold conditions, which will help them to break dormancy. This is a protection so that those seeds will not germinate prematurely in the fall, and then only to be killed off by the severe temperatures of winter. So they have to have the experience of winter before they'll germinate. And one way to do that is to put them in flats outdoors and you might want to protect the flats from hungry critters, birds and others, with screens. And you can also simply put those seeds in plastic bags in your refrigerator, which offers the ideal conditions. You need to have temperatures between 34 and 41 degrees Fahrenheit, and you need to keep the seeds moist. So vermiculite, sand, and moist paper towel will all accomplish that purpose. And here are three great resources, especially Wild Seed Project in Maine. They'll sell the seeds. They know which plants are the most valuable, and they offer a lot of information on their website about how to grow plants from seed. And initially, it's fine to grow them in fairly crowded conditions. They seem to like company, but eventually you're going to want to put them in their own separate cells and give them a chance to form a nice compact root system that'll bind that amount of soil, and then you can just pop that plug right into the ground. I'm aware of there was the neighboring town of Northampton where I live, near where I live. They did some volunteers stripped an area of sod on a slope in downtown Northampton, and this happened in November. So they just removed the sod, they put in plugs, and remarkably, even though the plants were fairly small at this point, they survived the winter just fine. And then when spring came, they were off and running. So when you plant plugs, you get quantity, they're cheap. You are assured that every one of these plants is genetically unique. But there's a time and a place for vegetative propagation as well. Even though these plants will be clones of one of another, you'll be able to give plants to your friends, for example, by just separating clumps like this, each one with its own root system, and then each one will then be able to form its own clump. Layering is accomplished by burying a stem and inducing it to root and then severing it from the parent plant. Cuttings are also a way of just simply cutting off a piece of the stem, removing removing the leaves of the lower part, because you don't want to bury the leaves in soil, and then just the rooting will happen from the stem itself. Here is a list of native plant nurseries and a list of New England native plant seed companies. Again, I can provide all this information to you if you send me an email message or if you contact the Brookline Public Library. So these are great resources, not only for the plants, but for information that you might be helpful to you in order to find out what kinds of plants would grow in the particular conditions, the microhabitats or the site conditions that you have, whether it's shady or sunny, whether it's wet or dry, whether it's high or low pH. If you have any special conditions like that you're wondering what would grow well, people with a lot of expertise in these nurseries or plant seed companies would be able to help give you tips and pointers about what plants would work for you. I do highly recommend New England wetland plants. The name wetland is actually kind of a misleading, because they do offer plants for all situations, not just wetlands. And they are a seed company that for wildflower meadows or a variety of, and they also offer plants themselves. Another source of expert advice is master gardeners who have these both phone and email, the Tower Hill hotline. You can send in a plant photo if you're trying to identify a plant, and there are also Facebook pages where you can, if you want to, native plants of New England, for example, is a Facebook page for ID. But master gardeners will also perhaps be able to tell you why your plant isn't doing too well and give you suggestions on how to bring it back to health. Joining a garden club is another great way to learn about plants and perhaps swap plants with each other. And then other people in your neighborhood are often eager to share their wealth, whether it's their produce or their wildflowers or their or just their information and their experience gardening. And it can be fun to have to join each other in projects and help each other with establishing pollinator gardens and other landscaping that's going to be wildlife friendly. Inviting children to be stewards of nature gives them a wonderful experience of satisfaction and accomplishment, and will be creating the next generation of adults who will care about the environment and know what the right thing to do is. And we'll need, it's an all hands on deck kind of moment right now in terms of how humans are interacting with the land. So all decisions must maximize the welfare of the unborn unto the 7th generation. This is the great binding law of the Iroquois Confederation. There is no limit to what we can do together. Start where you are, and thank you for doing your part. So please send me an email message, info@johnroot.net, if you'd like me to send you a list of the resources that I used to create this presentation. And I'd be happy to hear any comments or questions at this time.
Thank you so much, John. So we have run a bit over time. I'll just give the people who are here with us live a couple minutes in case anyone wants to put a question into the chat or unmute themselves and ask the question to John while we have him. Your slides are just so beautiful to look at. Never mind the wealth of information.
Right. Well, nature is beautiful. There's no question about it.
Indeed. All right, well, it looks like it's safe to wrap up. So thank you again to everyone who came, and thank you so much to John for being with us today.
Thank you, Britta.